Limerick City and County have one of the oldest and greatest military traditions in Ireland. This is partially because Limerick has been a strategically important city since its foundation by the Vikings in 922. It is also due to the fact that after Normans captured Limerick permanently in 1195, in the ensuing 700 years, an English, later a British garrison was usually stationed in the city. In 922, the British garrison left when Ireland became independent. But even since independence, the Irish Army has always had a large presence in Limerick. In addition, following the Treaty of Limerick in 1691, many thousands of Irish soldiers joined European armies. Under the penal laws, Catholics could not join the British Army, so they instead joined the armies of France, Spain, Austria, Russia, and other European powers. This exodus was known as the Flight of the Wild Geese. Many of the wild geese were from Limerick and rose to high rank in the various European armies. One of the most famous of these was Count Peter von Lacy from Killeedy in County Limerick, who rose to being a field marshal in the Russian army, was made a count, served as Governor General of Latvia and Estonia, and played a major role in Russia's rise to great power status in the first half of the 18th century. Another of the significant wild geese was Marshal Patrice de MacMahon, born in France, the grandson of Patrick MacMahon of Duradoyle, near Limerick City. A notable French general, he became famous for his role in the Crimean War, and in particular for his significant victory over the Austrians in the War of 1859 between France and Austria. Later, from 1873 to 1879, MacMahon served as President of France, one of the most significant political positions in the world. However, one of the most significant aspects of Limerick's military heritage was the British Army. The modern British Army was established by King Charles II in 1661 and in many respects was a typical army of its era. At this time, European armies were transformed by what has been called the Military Revolution. As part of this revolution, armies became permanent institutions. They increased greatly in size. Soldiers became full-time and received proper training. They began to wear uniforms. Discipline became very strict. Firearms came into common use. Soldiers stopped lodging with civilians and started living in purpose-built barracks. And armies were divided into units called regiments. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the military revolution had a major impact on Limerick. 4 barracks were built in Limerick in the 18th and early 19th centuries. King John Castle had been the strategic centre of Limerick since the 13th century. However, the increase in the size of the city's garrison resulted in the construction of Limerick's first barracks in the castle's courtyard in the 1740s. Completed in 1751, it was a modern 3-sided, 3-storey square building and remained the only barracks in Limerick for over 40 years. The existential crisis caused by the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars between 1792 and 1815 resulted in the building of 2 further barracks in Limerick. The new barracks were constructed between 1795 and 1797. They became the largest barracks in Limerick and since the 1920s have been known as Sarsfield Barracks. The Ordnance Barracks were constructed on Mulgrave Street in 1807 and are now the site of a new courthouse built in 2018. Limerick's 4th barracks was established in 1841 when the former workhouse became known as the Strand Barracks. It was the home base of the Limerick City Militia, which was a part-time force like the present Army Reserve. These army barracks played a major role in Limerick's history. They generally housed a total of about 1,000 men and played a major role in the Limerick economy. They were typical examples of total institutions, combined places of work and residence, where a large number of people were cut off from the wider community and led an enclosed, tightly controlled lifestyle. Their economic impact was significant due to the necessity for food and drink, goods and services, fodder and equipment for horses, and other necessities being sourced locally. In addition, the economic impact of the British Army can be seen from the establishment of Limerick Clothing Factory, which until the 1920s produced military uniforms, particularly for the British Army and for other military forces of the wider British Empire. The Anglo-Irish gentry provided a large number of officers to the British Army. This is because the younger sons of the gentry would not inherit the family estates and needed to find a career. Limerick produced some prominent generals who attained worldwide fame. One of these was Éire Massey, 1st Baron Clavina, who lived from 1719 to 1804. Born in Duntry in West Limerick, he joined the British Army at a young age. His military career of some 60 years' duration coincided with the long and bloody rivalry between Britain and France in the 18th century. He first attained prominence during the rebellion of Bonnie Prince Charlie, when he fought at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. At this battle, he attracted the attention of the Duke of Cumberland, who became his patron and subsequently facilitated his career. Massey's most notable campaigns were in the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763. This was a world war between Britain and France and was fought in North America, in the Caribbean and in India. In 1759, the British Army and their Native American allies were attempting to conquer the huge French Empire in Canada and Louisiana. Massey found himself in command of a force of British and Native American troops who faced a much larger French and Native American army at a place called La Belle Famille near the famed Niagara Falls. At the Battle of La Belle Famille, Massey's troops were successful, and following this victory, Fort Niagara nearby was captured. This was a major step in the British conquest of Canada. Massey was also part of the British forces that captured Montreal in 1760 and completed the conquest of Canada. In 1762, he served with the British forces that invaded the French island of Martinique in the Caribbean. And later on that same year, he distinguished himself in the capture of Havana in Cuba, a battle at which he was severely wounded. Following the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, Massey saw no further action, but became a prominent figure in the administration of the British Army in Ireland. He also sat as an MP in the Irish Parliament from 1790 to 1797, representing the borough of Swords. At the very end of the 18th century, Massey, who was now a full general, lobbied the British authorities to be raised to the peerage. He wanted to be created Lord Niagara in commemoration of his great victory near the Niagara Falls. But his wife protested, saying that she could neither spell nor pronounce the word Niagara. Instead, Massey was created the 1st Baron Clarina at the very end of 1800. Some 4 years later, at the age of 85, the 1st Lord Clarina died in Bath. Hugh Gough, 1st Viscount Gough, who lived between 1779 and 1869, was the greatest and most influential general ever produced by County Limerick. His career demonstrates how Limerick men fought with the British Army all over the world. Fighting the French at the Battle of Barracks in Spain in 1811, Gough's Irish troops in the British Army shouted "Fága Balla," based on the Irish Fágan Ballach, meaning clear the way, as they went into battle. One of Gough's soldiers captured the French Imperial Eagle, shouting, "Be jabers, boys, I have the cuckoo." This was the first French Eagle banner ever taken by the British Army. In subsequent decades, Gough rose steadily through the ranks, and during the Opium War of 1839 to 1842, he commanded the British troops that invaded China in an aggressive war caused by the Chinese government's efforts to stop the British selling an addictive drug called opium in China. During the Opium War, Gough defeated the Chinese at the battles of Canton and Amoy and gained renown in this war, which was one of the most influential and important wars in world history, as it brought China into the mainstream of world affairs. In the succeeding years, Gough's most important campaigns were fought in India. Indeed, his most important achievement was the defeat of the warlike Sikhs in northern India, which resulted in the Punjab becoming part of British India. He defeated the Sikh army in 4 major battles and was in the thick of the fighting himself. The Sikhs became the backbone of the British army in India and are still the backbone of the modern Indian army. Gough was loved and respected by his men, especially the Irish soldiers. He was a courageous warrior who was often in the thick of the fighting. He looked very impressive with his mane of long white hair and large drooping moustache. Unlike many Irish army officers in the British Army, he always retained his Irish accent. In the 19th century, he was regarded as the second greatest Anglo-Irish general after the Duke of Wellington himself. He died in 1869 at the age of 90. Sir George de Lacy Evans was born in 1787 and died in 1870. He was from Moyle in Askeaton in County Limerick, and he had a military career almost as long as that of his fellow Limerick man, Lord Gough. He served the British Army during the Anglo-American War of 1812 to 1815, and in 1814 he took part in the capture of Washington DC, during which the White House was burnt by the British. They also took part in the New Orleans campaign and was wounded at the famous Battle of New Orleans of 1815, in which the Americans inflicted a crushing defeat on the British. In the 1830s, he commanded the British Legion, which volunteered to assist Queen Isabella II of Spain in the First Carlist War. During the Crimean War, Evans was one of the few competent generals in the British Army. He took part in the Battle of the Alma, where he was injured, and also in the Battle of Balaclava. At the beginning of the Battle of Inkerman, he was in ill health but got out of his sick bed and onto the battlefield to encourage his men. By the standards of the time, he was considered to be a modest man who never claimed any credit for his victory. Also, rather unusually, he was a radical reformer. He sat in the British Parliament for over 30 years, and among his major interests were reform of the British Army. He campaigned for the abolishing of flogging, and he also campaigned for the abolition of the system under which British Army officers purchased their commissions and were expected to pay for each rank of promotion. While de Lacy Evans did not live to see the final abolition of the purchase system, his persistent call for their abolition were instrumental in their abolition eventually. And de Lacy Evans died in 1870 and was buried in Kensal Green Cemetery in London. The oldest Irish regiments were the Royal Irish Regiment, established 1684, and the Royal Irish Dragoon Guards, established 1685. However, a comprehensive system of Irish regiments only emerged as a result of late Victorian military reforms. In 1881, Britain and Ireland were divided into regimental districts, each of which had a regiment which drew its recruits from the district. Each regiment was made up of 2 full-time battalions, one serving overseas and one at home, i.e. Britain and Ireland, for training. In addition, there were 1 or 2 more part-time battalions made up of the local militias. In 1881, the Royal Munster Fusiliers Regiment was established by the amalgamation of 2 former Indian regiments, the 101st Regiment of Foot, formerly the Royal Bengal Fusiliers, and the 104th Regiment of Foot, formerly the Bengal Fusiliers. The regimental depot of the Royal Munster Fusiliers was at Ballymullen Barracks in Tralee. Its recruitment area were counties Cork, Limerick, Kerry and Clare. Its symbol was the Bengal tiger, and it had 3 regimental marches. St. Patrick's Day was one of them. The second one was called the British Grenadiers, and the third was Won't You Come Home to Bombay. The Royal Munster Fusiliers existed for 41 years, from 1881 to 1922. Soldiers of the Royal Munster Fusiliers saw service in both the Boer War from 1899 to 1902 and particularly the First World War from 1914 to 1918. In 1922, the granting of independence to the Irish Free State resulted in the disbanding of the Irish regiments whose recruiting areas were in the 26 counties, including the Royal Munster Fusiliers. On the 12th of June 1922, the colours of the disbanded regiments, including those of the Royal Munster Fusiliers, were handed over to King George V at a ceremony in Windsor Castle, where they are kept to this day.